The sea lay black beneath the crescent moon, restless as a sleeping god. From the cliffs of Euboea, a lone flame flickered, vanishing, reappearing, pulsing in deliberate rhythm. Farther down the coast, another fire answered, then another. Like stars winking into place, the signals spread across the night, carrying a message not for farmers or fishermen, but for kings. The Armada was to gather. In Athens, the Acropolis loomed like a spear point above the dark streets. Within its shadow, men who carried the fate of Greece on their shoulders met in secret. Torches hissed as they burned low, throwing wavering light on marble walls, scarred by centuries of worship and war. Themistocles, son of Neocles, stood at the center, sharp-eyed and restless. Though still young, his name carried weight across Greece, not for noble blood, but for cunning, for a mind that could twist disaster into opportunity. Around him stood allies and rivals alike. Aristides the just, stern and unyielding. Timon, heir of Miltiades, carrying the legacy of a marathon hero, and envoys from Corinth, Aegina, and Sparta, their cloaks heavy with dust from the road. Word has come from the north, Themistocles said, his voice steady but edged with urgency. Xerxes is on the move, and not as his father once did. His fleet is said to cover the Aegean with more sails than there are stars in the sky. If Athens and her allies don't act now, all of Greece will be crushed beneath Persian oars. The Spartan envoy, a hard man with the scarred face of one who had seen war since boyhood, folded his arms. And yet, Themistocles, you speak of ships as though wood and sails will decide the war. Sparta holds to her strength. The hoplite and the shield wall murmurs spread through the chamber. Aristides inclined his head toward the envoy. The spear has its place, but Themistocles is not wrong. At Marathon, we met the Persians on land and triumphed, but Marathon is not Salamis nor Thermopylae. The great king's road lies across the sea. To meet him, we must rule the waves. Themistocles leaned forward, seizing the moment. Athens already has 200 triremes, and more are rising in the shipyards of Piraeus. With your aid, his gaze cut to the Corinthian and Aeginetan envoys, and with Spartan courage to stiffen our resolve, we can forge a fleet strong enough to meet the Persian tide. The debate raged as fiercely as any battle. Pride clashed with pride, grudges resurfaced like old scars, and even the gods themselves seemed to listen. But while the men argued, the wind outside shifted, carrying with it the salt-scented promise of war. By dawn, decisions had been made. Not all were happy, but all were bound. Messengers rode with the rising sun, carrying oaths sealed in wax and bronze. Across Greece, from the pine-covered hills of Corinth to the whitewashed temples of Delos, the word spread. A great armada would be built. In Athens, the shipyards of Piraeus came alive with hammer and saw. Oak and pine from distant mountains were shaped into slender hulls. Bronze smiths forged rams sharp enough to split an enemy vessel as a butcher splits bone. Children ran along the beaches shouting of war, their eyes wide with wonder. Women wove sailcloth until their fingers bled. Slaves carried timbers in endless lines. The air grew thick with smoke, sweat, and the rhythm of labor. Themistocles walked among the shipwrights daily, speaking with commanders, with rowers, even with carpenters. He knew an armada wasn't just wood and men, but spirit. That victory depended as much on belief as on bronze. One evening, as the sun bled red over the Saronic Gulf, he stood on the half-finished deck of a trireme, speaking with Aristides. "You still don't trust me," Themistocles said quietly, watching the horizon. Aristides, tall and grave, met his gaze. "Distrust? Number. I know you too well. You're clever, Themistocles, clever enough to twist men like rope, binding them to your cause. But tell me this, do you serve Athens or only yourself?" Themistocles didn't answer right away. Waves lapped against the shore, their rhythm as old as time. At last he said, Does it matter? If my ambition raises Athens above all Greece, if it saves her people from Persian fire, then let my name be cursed with pride. I'll accept it. Aristides studied him for a long moment, then nodded. As long as Athens stands, I'll fight beside you. But hear me, if your ambition leads her to ruin, I'll be your enemy. Themistocles almost smiled. You already are, Aristides. But perhaps even enemies can row the same ship when the storm comes. Beyond the world of men, the gods watched. On Olympus, Hera and Athena sat in council, their eyes fixed on the mortal struggle below. The Persians swell with arrogance, Athena said, her voice cool and sharp as bronze. Xerxes builds an empire of slaves and calls it order. If Greece falls, our temples will burn with it. Hera's gaze was stern, and yet the Greeks are fractured, proud, quarrelsome, divided. They cannot unite unless bound by fear. Perhaps that is fate's design, that Persian fire will forge them into something stronger. Zeus, seated on his golden throne, said nothing. He only raised his hand, and thunder rumbled far off across the sea. The call of the Armada reached even Sparta. Though Spartans scorned the sea, they could not scorn honor. Leonidas, king of Sparta, agreed to send ships, though his true power lay in the phalanx that would soon hold the narrow gates of Thermopylae. From Corinth came swift vessels. From Aegina, hardened sailors who knew every current of the Aegean. Even from distant islands, fishermen and exiles arrived, drawn by the promise of glory and revenge against the Persian yoke. The fleet gathered at Aulis, where Agamemnon had once launched his 1,000 ships against Troy. There, amid the same winds and waters, a new host assembled, not for Troy, but for the freedom of Greece. The sight was overwhelming. Row upon row of triremes, their prows painted with eyes and fierce emblems, owls for Athens, dolphins for Corinth, lions for Sparta. Masts swayed like a forest of spears, sails rippled like the wings of white birds. On shore, men sacrificed bulls and goats, staining the earth with blood to win the gods' favor. Smoke rose toward heaven, carrying prayers for victory, or at least an honorable death. Themistocles stood before the assembled captains, his voice rising over the crash of waves. Behold, men of Greece, never before has such a fleet been seen on our waters. Not since Agamemnon's day has Greece united her strength. Yet our task is greater than Troy, for Troy was one city, and Persia is a sea without end. Still, I say this, a single storm can shatter even the greatest fleet. A single firebrand can ignite a forest. If we are bold, if we are cunning, we will be that storm, that firebrand. The men roared their approval, their cries echoing across the bay. Even those who doubted felt their blood quicken, for in that moment it seemed the gods themselves moved among them. And yet, far across the sea, in Sardis and Susa, Persian oars were already biting into the water. The greatest war the world had ever seen was coming. The Greek Armada had been born, but whether it would blaze like the sun or drown in darkness, no man could yet say.